Keep your head up. You're not alone. Keep your head up. Keep your head up. We're halfway home.
It's time for Your Voices of Hope, a video podcast program that offers straight talk on some of the major issues facing us today: addiction, domestic violence, homelessness, human trafficking, and suicide. But more than that, it's our desire to inspire hope. Now, your host, Michelle Byer.
Welcome to Your Voices of Hope. I am your host, Michelle Byer. My guest today is Corey Minor-Smith. Corey will describe to us about her struggles growing up in a house with a severely mental ill mom. But instead of growing up and living that lifestyle as some do in the homeless shelters and living off the system, Corey took it a whole other direction, and she went on to getting bachelor's degrees, masters, and doctorates, right up to working for an attorney in the housing authority, working to put homeless into homes, and then finally writing her own book. Hi, Corey. It's so great to have you here today.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate your invitation, and I truly appreciate the platform and how you're using it to help other individuals to have a higher quality of life. Your commitment and dedication to that is just undeniably awesome. So thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you. The stigma that goes along with mental health is so... It boggles my mind because, people look at certain people and they're like, oh, I'm afraid of them because of this. And then they look at me. I'm bipolar. I'm manic depressive. I have anxiety. Well, you don't look like you have any of those things. Why not?
Yeah.
I do. Let me tell you some of the crazy things I've done, to lack of a better word.
Yes.
So Corey, your mom is the one with the mental illness, correct?
Yes.
And what is
she was
her
diagnosed when I was like 14 years old.
With?
She was diagnosed with manic depression, paranoid schizophrenia.
Now that is a very difficult mental illness to deal with.
Yes.
So prior to her diagnosis, that would be probably harder because she wasn't on medication. So tell us what you went through living that way. What was that like?
Well, a part of my life is I didn't live with my mother the whole time. I eventually had lived in 3 states in 8 different households and attended 14 schools. And Michelle, just today, this is my first time publicly saying this, and I'm only saying it because someone encouraged me to tell how many times I moved. And I questioned, why was that important? It's already enough that I was in 8 different households. But I remember when I applied for the bar, when I had to go back, I think 10 or 14 years and say everywhere I lived. And it was such a hard thing to accomplish. I had to call up family, friends. Do you remember when I lived here? Where was I here? For all those years that I had to account for where I lived. Well, today I took the time and just sat from the time of birth to the time I went to college. I moved at least 21 times before going to college. And it just really touched me to sit there and think about that, to think about all of the different life issues, socioeconomic issues that I know more about now that I'm an adult, to know that the things that I was fighting against throughout my life, not knowing that I was fighting against them, and ultimately just coming to the realization that I was able to excel only because of people who prayed for me when I didn't know to pray for myself. Because there are times where I fell into some of the same ills that my parents did. They were on and off drugs, in and out of jail, and in my mother's case, in and out of mental institutions. But when I was 14 years old, she wanted me to live with her because I had chose to live in California with my dad. But I decided and agreed that I would live with her at that time. And I became more and more fearful each night because I didn't understand some of the things that my mother said. I didn't understand why she roamed throughout the apartment throughout the night. And I slept on the couch. She had a 1-bedroom apartment. I slept on the couch, and I would not sleep because I'm hearing her walking around, and I never knew, what is she doing? And I just had this underlying fear that something would happen to me if I went to sleep. One day, my mother talked nonstop, just conversations with herself, conversations with people who weren't there. She had expressed ideas of grandiose, and thinking that she was God or had healing powers like Jesus. And the only time I remember her saying something directly to me was that, "Corey, are you sick? Come to me, I can heal you. Do you know anybody else who's sick? I can heal them, Corey, I can." And I just remember those words so clearly. I'm 46 now, but that night is so clear and vivid to me right now. But I didn't know what to do. And the thing that I thought to do was to call my cousin, who came over right away, tried to console my mother. And ultimately we understood and knew that we couldn't. There wasn't anything that we could do but take her to the emergency room and seek some kind of help, although we didn't know what help we were asking for.
Right.
But it was at that time that my mom was diagnosed with manic depression, paranoid schizophrenia. And it's been a vicious cycle ever since that time frame.
Now, back then, because we're going back,
Yes.
and Heartland was, I believe, Massillon State Hospital back then. Was she put into a hospital? Because you had said she was in and out of hospitals. Was it mental facilities, behavioral health hospitals, or was it just regular hospitals at that point? Did she ever spend a length of time in a mental health behavioral hospital, or what were the hospitals?
Absolutely, she did. And actually, we weren't even in Ohio at that time. We were in Houston, Texas. And so, yes, when she went into the emergency room, she was committed to a hospital. And at that time, I didn't know, the system as I know it now. But I stayed with my cousin until my mom was released from the hospital, and just continued on with this fear, because at this point, I don't know what happened to my mom. I don't know what this thing is that they say that she has. What does this mean? All I know is that I agreed to live with her. So like I said, we were in a 1-bedroom apartment, and my mom had applied for a 2-bedroom. And while we waited for that 2-bedroom, we moved in with friends from church. And one day, my mom worked at my school. She worked in the cafeteria. She wasn't at school. And after school, she wasn't at the house. And around then, there was a popular TV show called Arsenio Hall. So it was a late night talk show. It came on around 11 o'clock. So it was late. And still at 11 o'clock, my mother was not at the house. Then there was a phone call, and I am the one who happened to answer the phone, and it was my mother. So I asked, when are you going to be here? She said, "Well, I'm on my way home." "Okay, when are you coming? When will you be here?" She said, "I'm not on my way there. I'm on my way to Canton." So when I was 15, my mother left me in Houston, Texas, and came back to Ohio by herself. I know now as an adult that she was probably in some state of psychosis, maybe not making the best decisions or understanding the full capacity or ramifications of her decision at that time. But that's when I moved into my, I believe, 6th household, and moved in with my cousins, all really for my attempt at 15 years old to stay in the same school, because by this time I was in my 13th school, just starting high school at A-Leaf Hastings South in Houston, Texas. So I stayed with my cousins as long as I could, because the school knew that I wasn't living with parents or legal guardians. And in order to continue to go to that school, I had to live with legal guardians. That just seemed like too permanent of a situation, and it seems like these decisions were made by me at the age of 15, because everybody asked me, "Well, where do you want to go? What are you going to do?" I knew I couldn't go back to California because of the life that I chose to live when I was there, trying to sell drugs, hanging out in the streets, drinking underage, taking cars, you know, even the police being called on me one time when I took the car, that didn't put fear or make me want to change my life. It wasn't until I got suspended from school that I actually knew I needed to make a change in my life. So just thinking about those things, I knew I couldn't go back to California because I would be right back into the stuff that I was choosing to do as a teenager.
So that
So
was my next question.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. How did this affect you? And do you think you could have gone in the wrong direction? And what made
absolutely.
you go into the direction that you actually chose? Because, and are you, I mean, this is like a 3-part question. And are you afraid of your own mental illness? And were you at the time, I mean, afraid of your own mental illness or having a mental
health or just wellness of my mental state? Right. You know, at that time, I wasn't thinking on that level. Now that I know more about mental illness, advocacy, resources that are available, I encourage people, you know, you don't have to have a mental illness to care about your mental health, your mental well-being. So I feel it's important for us to, right along with physicals, that we get mental health exams, you know, assessments, and use whatever tools and strategies to help us with everyday stressors, because we all have them. We all have or should have a concern about our mental well-being, just like we do our physical well-being. But at that time, 14, 15 years old, no, I wasn't thinking anything about that. And I, you know, even knowing that my mom was sick, I didn't know my mom was sick. Not like that. You know, I've come to a greater appreciation of it as an adult than during my teenage years. And I had to go through stages of learning, you know, going through the stage of grief, that this is not the mother that I know, and she may never be the mother that I knew before. Going through my stage of denial. My mom is not sick, especially when I went to the mental health hospital to what is now known as Heartland. It was Massillon State when my mom was first committed here in Ohio. I did not believe that my mother belonged there. Seeing the other people that were there, I said, my mom's not like them. She doesn't belong here. And I went through that stage in my life. And really, Michelle, it wasn't until this past Mother's Day that I feel like I've come to almost a full circle with this mental health thing, in knowing that my mom may never be who I want her to be in my life. She may never be able to do all the things that she did before without help and assistance, when she's willing to accept the help and assistance. And so I encourage people now, you know, we have to love our loved ones with their symptoms whenever they exhibit themselves, in whatever level of severity they exhibit themselves. And if you're going to take on that task and challenge of loving your loved one through the severe mental illness, you have to yourself be prepared, you know, knowing what those resources are that are available in the community, knowing that you cannot do this by yourself, and that it is essential to rely upon the help. We can't afford to be ashamed. We can't afford to be guilty. We can't afford to think that we have to mask all the problems and push through on our own, because it's unnecessary to live that way. There's help available, and we need to take advantage of the help that's available.
So you're 15 years old, you're in Texas, you know that you can't stay.
Right.
So you can't go to California because you know what's going to happen to you there. Smart choice. Yeah. And most 15-year-olds aren't always making the smartest choices.
People praying for me when I didn't know to pray for myself. That's the only, that's
God,
what I think of.
God is looking down and helping you, and prayers, right? So did you hop a plane or a drive or whatever, how you got back here? What happens once you get back to Ohio or get into Ohio?
It was very sad, Michelle, because yes, my family, you know, pulled the money together to get me a plane ticket. And when I got to the airport, nobody was there to pick me up. I remember calling my grandmother's house and my mom answering, and she was like, you know, you all play too many games. She didn't believe that I was here. And I don't know where the rest of my family was. Like, did anybody know I was coming? So I called my family in Texas, and I'm like, I want to come back. They don't even know I'm here. So I sat at the airport until another cousin came and picked me up. and took me to my maternal grandmother's house where my mom lived with my 2 uncles. And it was actually in Southeast Canton in the projects, where I lived when I was first born. My mom, was 17 when she had me and still living at home. And that was actually my first house. And interestingly enough, the agency that I work for right now is the owner of that property, Stark Metropolitan Housing Authority. So I went from being a resident to being general counsel for the agency.
I love how you've come full circle.
Thank
you
you.
know to me, I find that really, that's a blessing to the people that you're serving. It's sort of like my job. I was there. I know what it's like. So that makes us more accountable, or not accountable, but it makes us helpful to our community.
And definitely able to relate to the circumstances and situations that are involved with lives that rely on these types of services in the community. The benefits of housing and food and any type of supplemental assistance, because a large number of our population needs these things in place. And so when budgets get cut that cut those types of funds, it's horrific for individuals. They already can't make ends meet, and to cut those types of funds just is an adverse impact to the utmost degree in serving those individuals. And that's what leads to the issues with the mental health care system. It was already underfunded. When hospitals back in the 60s were closed down and all of those people moved out of the institutions, many of them moved onto the street and never found any type of housing, never was connected to services or medication, left untreated on the streets to deal with their mania, their paranoia. And it's just a horrible, horrible thing to see.
It is. It really is. So now you're living in the projects. You go back to school, high school, which, again, living in that type of an environment, a lot of kids are playing hooky. They're doing drugs. I remember
that's prevalent in a lot of different communities. Even in some of our more higher economic status communities, there are social ills. You just don't hear about them as much.
That is true.
In my community, I was around my family. I wouldn't have known, that I was in poverty or living in a food desert, which now as an adult, I know, but I'm on the bus right along with my uncle going to high school. And now it's my 14th school. And I went to that particular school because more of my family went there. I felt like I would have more of a support system, get to know people. And ultimately, I had intended to transfer, but I got involved in so many different things at Temkin Senior High School that I stayed throughout my high school career. And I was just able to do so many things at Temkin. That school means so much to me. So even with the merger, or some people feel a hostile takeover, that school, whether the building is there or not, has a place in my heart like forever, because it was there that I had stability. Finally, it was there that I was able to accomplish so much. I mean, my senior year, just think about that. This is my 14th school. I'm living now in my 8th household ultimately, which we'll get to as to how I got to the 8th household. But I was able to maintain over a 4.0 my entire senior year, graduate in the top 20 of my class, and be involved in so many organizations. I was just trying to excel in any way that I could, because I wanted more than what I saw throughout my life. And this was without even dealing with my mom's mental illness. It was just the poverty that I saw, and I wanted more. Seeing my mom struggle 2-3 jobs at a time, I knew I wanted more. And I was going to do whatever I had to legally, because like I said, I was doing other things illegally when I was in California, but to legally move forward and live the best life that I could live.
And so you go on to college from there, and your first degree that you get is a bachelor's degree in arts. What
Arts and science? Yeah, English.
Okay, so you choose English, and from what made you choose that?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm a lawyer, and I knew in high school that I wanted to become a lawyer. So just real quick, we talked about what happened when I was 14, what happened when I was 15, on to year 16 on this earth. And unfortunately, what led to me being in my 8th household is that in the midst of one of my mom's psychotic states, she did attack me. And it took 3 people to get her off of me, separate us, get me safely out of the house. But that also landed me in the family court system. I was removed from the home, a no contact order between my mother and I. And I just thank God that my paternal grandmother was willing to take me in. This was a widow who's retired, already raised her own 5 kids in addition to her twin nephews, 3 of my cousins prior to me, and she was willing to open her door for me to come and live with her. And it was during that time, my grandma Blue Shell, that I had stability. I finally had stability, living in one place for over a year, being at one school for over a year, until such time that I went on to college. So during this time, my big introduction to wanting to know more about what was going on with my mother was when I got to college. My sophomore year, there was a movie that came on television in 1994 called Out of Darkness, starring Diana Ross. It was a TV movie. When I saw the commercials for the movie, I knew I had to watch it. I wanted to know, what did the family do to help this woman? Because Diana Ross played a character named Polly. And Polly was in medical school. And in the midst of her medical school career, she started showing signs of severe mental illness. And she had a daughter. They lived with the grandmother, which at that time, before, I lived with my mom and her mom. So it just resonated with me. I wanted to see, even though it was a fictional story, what did they do to help her, if at all? So that was my first desire, to learn more about my mom's situation and my position in her life, her position in my life. From getting my English degree, I did that because I knew I wanted to go to law school. People always said, if you want to go to law school, you have to major in something, because you can major in anything. But if you major in something that has you read a lot and write a lot. So I went into English. But my master's degree, that's where a lot of people question, why did you get that? Master's of Education in Guidance and Counseling. Guidance and counseling helped me tremendously to have a foundation for understanding my mom. We learned and studied from the DSM-4. The DSM-5 is out now. That's the diagnostic book that has all the recognized disorders, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was through that 2-year graduate program that I learned so much more about my mother. And at that time, she was living with me when I was in college. In my junior year, she asked to move from Canton to come to where I was in college. And I felt like I couldn't tell her no. I'm her only child. So she came and lived with me. It became very bad because she was untreated. But at this time, I didn't understand, what was going on. But that introduced me to knowing the importance of knowing about the resources available in the community. Because in those times that my mother locked herself in the room, wasn't taking care of herself, hygiene-wise, daily things that we may take advantage of every day, I had to call upon somebody to help. And whether it was law enforcement, and I believe at this time they probably were CIT trained officers who came and knew what to do to help my mother. And that's what helped introduce me into the different services that were available. Finishing that program, then going on to law school, had my oldest son in the midst of all of that, my senior year in college, and again, also taking care of my mother. But just steadfastly moving forward with trying to reach the goals I wanted in my life, and incorporating still being there for my mother as I continued on trying to live my own life. And ultimately, it led me to the advocacy that I do right now, and helping other families that are trying to live their lives, but still be there for their loved ones who may live with severe mental illness.
Your life is exhausting.
Yeah.
And inspiring. So let's fast forward to last year. Mm-hmm. When you wrote your book. As I started writing mine, you published yours, and mine is nowhere near even close. I stopped writing, which was a big mistake. But tell us about that book that came out.
Well, hashtag driven.
Stop it.
Yeah,
And
hashtag driven. The forward is by Les Brown, international motivational speaker and best-selling author. And this book is essentially 30 years in the making.
Driven is the perfect word to describe you.
Thank you. And that's really how we came up with that title, because I had this old long-winded title before, but to sum it all up, hashtag driven. But I was 16 after the attack and the court experience and moving in with my grandmother, 8th household, 14th school. My cousin, who I live with in Texas, I told him, they were here visiting in Ohio from Texas, and I told him, I'm writing a book. I was 16. I didn't know what my whole story was, but it seemed to me at that time that I had enough to write a book. And so it was in my head since 16 that I was going to write a book. And from then on, I just had this exciting statement, I'm writing a book. But ultimately, approximately 30 years later, I turned my 45th birthday celebration into my book launch. And I thank God the book was ready to finally be published. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. It wasn't until like 10 years ago that I actually started really, truly committing time to getting it done. Throw in all the elections campaigns that I was in that time, just life
Exhausting.
in general. Yeah, going through a divorce and custody battles and just a bunch of different stuff in between. But that's the whole point of hashtag driven. Anybody who is still trying to press forward and keep forward is hashtag driven, because life, no matter how successful you become, doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, doctor, celebrity of some prominent status, CEO, life is going to bring you problems. So what are you going to do with them? Let them weigh you down or help you to move forward? I choose to allow my problems to be fuel for my power. I turn my problems into my power. And the way I was able to share that is in the prologue. And I talk about Shannon Sharp's Hall of Fame induction speech. He talked about having a 5-alarm fire inside of him that drove him to be the best football player that he could be. And many of us have situations in our lives that is driving us to do more, accomplish more, seek out more to overcome those undesirable circumstances. And I'll just share with you where that phrase comes from, undesirable circumstances. I had a teacher at Timpkin Senior High School. Her name is Norma Washington. She used to use her time, free time, extra time, to help students like me apply for colleges and scholarships to go to college. Because if anybody was like me, you didn't know how school was going to get paid for, right? I was awarded a state that was placed with my grandmother. You know, if she wasn't there, I would have went into foster care. I praise God I wasn't. I call it community care because people took me in when they didn't have to. But Norma Washington said I had undesirable circumstances because she knew more about my life at that time than I did. And she told me to write about it, write about those things. College admissions committees, they want to see you have the tenacity, determination to make it through unfortunate obstacles or, challenges, because college is hard. And they want to invest in those students who are more than likely to excel beyond the obstacles, but excel beyond it being hard and stay in the game. So I wrote about it. The first time I wrote about it, received my first scholarship. I understood what she meant. And that phrase, that 2-word phrase, turned into my life's motto, which is don't allow undesirable circumstances to be excuses for you to fail, but allow them to be reasons for you to exhale. And I use that in my life every day. I share it every time I speak, because life is going to have problems. They're not going away. We can't be immune to it. Just like mental illness, there's no immunity to it. It does not discriminate anybody, race, gender, religion, cultural background, socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter. You can be impacted by mental illness. And it's important to understand the resources that are available.
That's right. Corey, one final thought that you'd like to share with us before we go?
One final thought. I would like people to know I have this strategy that I made up, 3 A's, AAA strategy to eradicating stigma and being there for your loved one who's living with severe mental illness. First A, acknowledging that they have an illness. Get out of denial, get out of embarrassment and shame. Learn about the illness, learn all that you can, resources that are available in the community, and be there for your loved one. 2, accepting. You can acknowledge it. Now you got to accept it. Accept that they have this illness. Accept that they're going to exhibit symptoms. Just because they're on the medication doesn't mean that all the symptoms are going to go away. You have to adapt your relationship with that family member, that loved one, and move forward if you're going to be there for them. They don't need you if you're not going to be there for them. And they may never be able to show you or tell you how they appreciate you. Let all that go. Accept it. Be there for them. Third one is advocacy. Michelle, thank you for all your advocacy, all your work in this space, right? We have to use our voices as loud as they are, as quiet as they may be. Use your voice. Write editorial articles. Write to your legislators. Express the importance of funding for mental health services, especially in light of COVID. We have individuals who are not getting services already before the coronavirus hit and caused this pandemic. And now we have even more individuals who need services, and our system, our behavioral health care system right now is insufficient to provide the services, treatment, funding that is needed to help these individuals. AAA strategy, acknowledging, accepting, and advocacy. And I encourage people to implement that in their lives. Also, I provide 5 essential keys to loving a loved one with severe mental illness, and your audience can get this for free. Just going to CoreyEmpowers.com. It's just essential information to give you baseline knowledge of how you can be there for your loved one. We want to make sure there's 41 to 43% of U.S. adults who have actually sought treatment for their mental illness. In that, only maybe 30% of African Americans will seek treatment for services related to their mental health concerns and issues. We have to break the cycle. As a community, as a whole, this United States, we can't afford to be ashamed of mental illness. It's here, it's been here globally. It's a 365-day-a-year global issue. And we need to be prepared to address it. And I just strongly encourage it, families and friends, to be there for their loved one and know that they don't have to do it alone.
I love it. Where can people get your book?
Well, #driven, you can go to CoreyEmpowers.com and order it, and it's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback form. If you order it from me, you can get a personalized autographed copy, and that will be sent to you. So just reach out to me on all social media platforms. I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Corey Empowers or Corey Minor Smith. And I would love to, autograph the book and personalize it for you if you would like. Otherwise, you can go to CoreyEmpowers.com and order your book.
Thank you so much, Corey Minor Smith, for joining me today.
Thank you, Michelle. I truly appreciate it. And ever since that time we spent on the panel together where you shared your story, I shared mine along with others on that panel. That was an instrumental part of my life in advocating when I didn't know that I was advocating. So I really appreciate, again, all that you do in this space and all you're willing to continue to do.
Well, thank you. That means so much to me. And I want to thank everyone for joining me today for another episode of Your Voices of Hope. If you would like to sign up to be a guest on my show, please go to my Facebook page or my website, Your Voices of Hope. Please remember, love yourself.
You've been listening to Your Voices of Hope with your host, Michelle Beyer. This podcast and earlier programs are available for viewing on our Facebook page, Your Voices of Hope, or our website, yourvoicesofhope.com. A new podcast is uploaded and ready to view every Wednesday at 7:00 p.m.
Keep your head up, keep your head up. You're not alone.